Motor's taking very serious today. This is excellent. So, we're going to start international relations. This bit is called International Relations 1919 to 1939. So essentially, what we need to look at is the Paris Peace Conferences that took place, starts with the Paris Peace Conferences that took place after World War I. A peace conference, generally in historical terms, happens after a war to decide what happens, what's going to be the new way of life. You have the previous way of international relations, of countries going on, then you have the war, then afterwards you have the next lot of international relations. It sets up the rules of the game, how we should play. That's what we do. And generally, the peace conference is held in the capital or the city of the winner, the person who's won it, because they're the host. So the hosts, they get to choose the agenda, they get to choose what's going on. So this one is hosted in Paris. So straight away we can see the influence of the French. Most of the wars on the Western Front's been fought in Paris. So huzzah. This conferences, people will sit around and they will talk. We talk about the big three: Lloyd George, England, Clemenceau of France, Woodrow Wilson of the United States. They're the major ones there. We also have Orlando of Italy is sometimes mentioned as a big four if they want to differentiate. Everybody else, lots of other countries are there, lots of people there. I mentioned before how Ho Chi Minh turns up and says, "Hello, please let me in, I want to talk about Vietnamese independence." And he's told the entrance is that way. Alright, so, peace conferences. Which ones are we talking about? These are all the ones to decide what to happen between the Entente powers and the defeated Central Powers. So the main one, these conferences will all result in a treaty. Alright, and all of the treaties are signed in chateaus or palaces around Paris. Alright, so Versailles is the big one. That's going to be to do with Germany. Trianon is to do with Hungary. Sèvres to do with Turkey, and then will be forgotten about, and then a new one will come in. Saint-Germain about Austria. Neuilly for Bulgaria. One country missing, because it's a complete shambles, is Russia. The Russian Empire has collapsed. It's been defeated by Germany and by communism. It's in a civil war. The main government in Moscow and St. Petersburg, Petrograd as it was then, is the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks are being confronted by the Royalists, the Whites, and the Greens, who were the peasants. And there's also intervention from the Allied powers, so Japan, the United States, France, and Britain have all invaded Russia at this point. So Russia's not invited to the peace conference. There's another problem with the peace conference. Is a lot of the countries that started the war no longer exist. Austria-Hungary has just sort of like dissolved. You know when you cook a souffle and something and it all gets big and then goes pfft. That's what's happened to Austria-Hungary. Alright, it's been divided up into various successor states. Successor states mean countries that succeed the old state. So Russia and Ukraine are successor states of the USSR. Austria-Hungary successor states. Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, parts of what will become Yugoslavia. Poland as well. The Ottoman Empire no longer exists. The German Empire supposedly is now a democracy. So the problem is, who are you going to blame? Serbia no longer exists as part of Yugoslavia. Alright, so a lot of the major countries that started World War I, they no longer exist. So that unlike previous conferences, where even after the Napoleonic Wars, France was still represented, a lot of these countries don't. And in particular, this means we're going to end up with one bad dude. And the bad dude is going to be Germany. Alright? To understand what happens, we need to have a look at the consequences. Alright, up until this time, this is the biggest and most deadliest conflict in terms of history, in all of history. On a mechanized scale, alright, this is industrial warfare. Because you can kill a lot more people a lot more quicker with industrial machinery like tanks and machine guns and artillery than you can do with a sword. So we have millions dead. This is the so-called lost generation. You know, you talk about Generation Z and Generation X, go us, Gen X, we're great. Alright, and the boomers and stuff. Well, this is the lost generation. You've got millions wounded. Consequences of this. Well, one is psychological. Did they die in vain? And make this on a personal level. Everybody knows somebody who is dead or is maimed. If you went to school, at least half the male population that you went to school with is dead or wounded. Maybe more than that if they came of age in 1914. So you have to make sure that this wasn't in vain. You want to make certain that your son, your boyfriend, your husband, your uncle, your best friend didn't die for no reason. Millions of women, and also following that as well, if it was a breadwinner, if it was a father, if it was a husband, they were the main earner in the household. Who now is going to look after the children? Is it fair that the state or other family members pay for their family? If you're somebody's incapacitated with horrific wounds caused by gas, half their face falling off, caused by shrapnel, who's going to look after them? More to the point, who's going to pay to look after them? Who is therefore responsible for causing all of this death and destruction? Because we need to find out who's responsible, because then we can make certain that they are the ones who pay. This is the first time, arguably, in an industrial sense, where whole countries have been mobilized, whole people have been mobilized. This concept of total war, absolutely everything in a country, in Britain, France, Germany, has been used to fight the conflict. The old empires, old Europe, has been destroyed. This is Europe committing suicide, First World War, really. The Russian Empire, German Empire, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman empires, all gone. These empires, but German's the most recent, because that's since 1870. Russian Empire, the Tsars, they go back to 1500s. Austro-Hungarian and the Habsburgs, they've been around forever. The Ottomans, they conquered Constantinople in around 1300s. Right? This is epoch-defining moments in history. They've just gone overnight. And these successor states, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, Yugoslavia, I should have put in there as well, they emerged. These new states. The question is, they're new. What are they going to be their borders? They've never really existed before. Czechoslovakia hasn't existed before. What's their borders? Where's their borders? Who's their leaders? And they're smaller. So if they're smaller, they're going to be less powerful than these empires. Germany is clearly blamed by much of the world for World War I. Why is this? Well, militarism before World War I, they were known as a militaristic power. Bismarck, who was the minister-president under Kaiser Wilhelm, who led German unification, said prior to German unification that it would be forged by blood and iron. Wow. We're going to make this happen through blood and iron. Well, that's a euphemism for war. Alright, and they were founded on war, and militarism was a big thing in Germany before World War I. How did the war start? Well, they invaded France, who had done nothing to them at that stage, and they invaded France through neutral Belgium. Well, that's not very nice, is it? So when it comes to who does the shooting, rather like if there's a fight, let's say, Side is very upset with her English marks, and she goes up to Mr. Richard and says, "Oi, Dickie, Ricky, what's happening with my marks? And he says, oh, I'm sorry, it's just going to be a C. But ha 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 ha. And Saida loses it and she punches Mr. Richard, slaps him across the face. Says, don't you do that, alright? Who's going to be caught to blame for that? Well, the person's going to be to blame because she's the one who started it. She's the one who started the violence. Same with Germany. Germany's the one who starts the violence.
To be honest, that would be something I would pay to see.
Oh, and actually, no, even more than actually. She doesn't. Mr. Richard does that and says ha ha ha. But instead of hitting Mr. Richard, she then hits Miss Deepika first because she's Belgium, and to get Miss Deepika sort of like in the way. All right, so she like slaps Miss Deepika, pushes Miss Deepika against in the bin or sort of out the window. All right, to get to Mr. Richard. All right, so clearly everybody's like, well,
I can see that happening.
There is a lot of reasons why Germany's going to be to blame, particularly if you're French and if you're Belgium, who have suffered the most of the people that's there. In Belgium, they commit atrocities. Now, it's not as great as propaganda would have us believe. They don't go around throwing babies up in the air and catching them on bayonets. They do that. That's what they do that in World War II.
Wait,
They do that in World War II when they go into Jewish hospitals. Yes, they do. In some parts of Eastern Europe, throw from windows. Yes, they do. All right, which is one of the reasons why people don't appreciate the Holocaust at first, because they don't understand. They're like, oh, it's just propaganda, because it was said the same thing happened during World War One. All right, in World War One, they do, however, commit atrocities. There's a massacre in a place called Louvain in Belgium. All right, so again, the nasty Hun. And the areas that they occupy, northern France and Belgium, these areas are the main, even still today, main areas of German industry, of French industry, of Belgian industry, as well as having lots of farmland. This is been destroyed by the Germans. The Germans have just come in and smashed the place up. Imagine if somebody comes into your house, and all right, they don't go upstairs, but they stay downstairs and they trash the kitchen. All right, they trash the kitchen. They trash your lounge. You'll be like, well, you did this. You might have thinking that I was getting together with somebody across the street and we were going to come in the middle and get you, but we didn't do that yet. And not only that, you went through my neighbour's shed to get there. Right? So all of these means that Germany's to blame for much of World War One. And they are really. There's a lot of like post facto discussion about saying, oh, Germany's treated really badly. A lot of nonsense. Germany was treated far too softly, in my honest opinion. As I would come, there is a unique view, I accept. And then also, and in terms of, and actually I think if you're looking at this in 500 years' time, looking back on this, you're going to say this is actually you're going to ignore everything that we're going to do today, and you're going to concentrate on two major long-term effects of this. Number one is, this is Europe committing suicide. Europe's dominance of the world for the last 200 years ends now because of this conflict. They commit suicide. This leads to massive decolonization, the end of empires. Yes, we're talking about the Russian, German, Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires going, all right, but it sows the seeds for the end of the British, the French, Spanish, Portuguese, or Spanish has already gone really, the Portuguese and other European empires. That's number one. Number two is the United States of America becomes the most powerful country in the world. All right, it overtakes England, overtakes Great Britain in that role as the most powerful country in the world. Britain has to, in order to pay for this, has to liquidate a lot of its overseas assets, which then get taken over by the United States. Believe it or not, before World War One, South America was seen as being an unofficial part of the British Empire because the British controlled a lot of the economy. They didn't take it over politically, as the British had done in places like here in India, but they controlled the economies of South America. They had to liquidate those assets. They couldn't sell to those countries because those export industries were being used to manufacture weapons productions, and the United States walked in there. So prior to 1914, places like Peru, Chile, Argentina in particular, they were basically run by the British. So let's have a look at our big three. There they are. George Clemenceau. I love Clemenceau. What do you know about Clemenceau?
He was very angry guy, the tiger.
Very angry guy, the tiger.
And he wanted almost complete annihilation the annihilation of Germany, because France had been invaded by Germany multiple times, and they did not like that, and they did not want it to happen ever again.
Which is fair enough. He always comes off as the bad guy in your traditional lessons of this. Clemenceau is an absolute legend. All right, I'm going to go back to how he became, before he became president. He was a newspaper owner. He owned a newspaper called La Hora. And that paper led a very famous headline, one of the most famous headlines in all of newspaper history. J'accuse! What does, my French people, j'accuse?
I accuse you.
I accuse, exactly right. Not somebody called Jack Hughes, all right, but it's who is this Jack Hughes? I accuse, right? And in the turn of the century France, there was l'affaire Dreyfus. Have you heard of the Dreyfus affair? Oh, okay. So, continuing this theme of anti-Jewish sentiment in Europe, actually first becomes really prominent in France. And there's a Jewish officer called Dreyfus, who is accused of spying for Germany. Dun dun dun. This is really bad. So, he's accused of spying for Germany. He is found guilty of spying for Germany. He is found guilty of spying for Germany. He is richly humiliated because he's a French army officer. So he's paraded in public, and they go up to him, and he has his epaulets with his rank on it, and they rip them off and they throw them on the floor, and he's then led off, and he's led off to Devil's Island. And Devil's Island is a French penal colony off the coast of South America, in French Guiana, on the Amazon coast, hell-ridden, real big castle, Devil's Island. Oh, and he's there, and he's going to spend the rest of his life there. Now the thing is, he's innocent, totally innocent. Not only that, the government and the military know he's innocent. So, there is a problem here. The government and the Ministry of Defence and the Army, they don't want to admit that they've had an innocent. They think it's less important that an innocent man be put in jail, particularly a Jewish man, be put in jail wrongly, than admit that the army and the government made a mistake. They think the prestige of the army and of the government is more, out of the state, not just the government, the state, is more important than one man. And so this becomes a big election issue. Should we release him or not? Should we release him or not? What's right? And it gets leaked to the press. And one of the key, and you have lots of elections in the 1890s are not between right and left, not between Democrats and Republicans, but between those who agree with that Dreyfus should be released, the Dreyfusards, and the anti-Dreyfusards. And one of the key moments in all of this is Clemenceau, and he gets together with a very famous French writer called Émile Zola, and Émile Zola has decided to go public with j'accuse. I accuse the President of the Republic. I accuse the head of the General Staff. I include this general, this Minister of Defence. Name them of lying, of covering up the truth, of treason. Clemenceau publishes this. Why? Because the army controls military courts, and the army's saying we can't put Dreyfus on trial, and they won't, and they control it. Military, they control it. But accusing them in public of lying and deceit, well, then you have to, you have to take them to court. The army has to take Zola and Clemenceau to court for slander, for defamation. Otherwise, it's clear if they don't, then it's clear it's true. So Clemenceau and Zola played this really cunning trick on them. Yeah? And Clemenceau stands up for this because they have to fight it in court. They want to get it in court. Public. You bring your evidence.
Wait, no, I don't understand how, if they don't take them to...
This is because they're talking about honour. If somebody makes an accusation against you, particularly a severe one, that you've lied and that you've put an innocent man in jail, and you don't take them to court for it, for slander and slander, you're basically saying it's true.
Oh, like that. Okay.
Yeah, so you have to. And they want their day in court. And they get their day in court. They lose. Zola has to flee and goes to prison. But eventually, after that, there's parliamentary inquiries and it comes out as being true. All right? So Clemenceau has a big role to play in this. All right? And actually is a bit of a... Him and Zola are actually quite heroic in standing up for truth and justice. So Clemenceau has that. He's therefore seen as being a high-minded man of principle. He's very determined. He's the tiger. He gets what he wants. He comes in as you have a president in France, and he's the prime minister. The president is Poincaré, more of a ceremonial type role. Prime minister has most of the role. He comes in 1916, 1917, because he's this media sort of mogul. All right, he controls a lot of the French newspapers, but also as a man who can get things done. The French war effort, 1916, 1917, is going very badly. The French in 1917 army mutinies. Now, unlike the Russian army, which mutinies, which goes home, the French army stays, but says we're not going to attack anymore. Here's an idea, guys. Running up machine guns gets you killed. Not a big fan. Je ne voudrais pas running of machine guns, right? So they kind of stop. Clemenceau, and it's seen as being, we need a strong person to come in here and just sort things out. Clemenceau's that man, and he's there at the end of the war. He's seen as being somebody who can get things done, who is strong, that tiger, with his big moustache, and he hates the Germans. Utterly hates the Germans. He will get a result for France. He will give France the determination that she needs at that moment in the war when it's not going well for France at all. Hates the Germans so much. It's probably an apocryphal story, which means it's maybe not true, but I want it to be true because it's so good. When he was buried, instead of being buried horizontally, he was buried vertically, looking towards the German-French border. As if to say, no, je ne passe, you shall not pass, like Gandalf, you shall not pass. All right, so he was buried that way, looking always that way. All right, so that's our friend Clemenceau. David Lloyd George, what do we know about David Lloyd George?
British Prime Minister. What was his? Oh yeah, his main objective was to make up all the money that Britain lost in the First World War to America. Pay back the debts to America. No.
Oh wait, he also wanted Germany to not have either a navy or air force.
So David Lloyd George, as a person, is your quintessential politician. He will say one thing to you and then say one thing to you. All right, he will change what he's saying. He's the man that the easiest one. Everybody says that he's therefore in the middle and of between the two extremes. In reality, he gets what he wants straight away, and then can play, I'm going to be the arbiter of all of this sorts of thing. All right, and also during the middle there's an election campaign. So before you often get source questions say, Lloyd George says one thing, then he says another thing. When he goes in public speaking, he's one of the classic politicians. When he's speaking in public for an election, he will say one thing, and then privately afterwards he will say another thing. All right. Again, he came to power in Britain in 1916. Exactly the same reasons, really, as Clemenceau. Right, the British army wasn't defeated, but the government was in all kinds of turmoil, and he therefore, Asquith, who was the prime minister, is then kicked out, and Lloyd George comes in as a leader of a big coalition because he was Minister of Munitions and sorted out that there was a shell crisis. So he's seen as a man of action who can get stuff done. All right, that's Lloyd George. His main things is, what does Britain care about? All right, Britain cares about, has a shock from World War One. For the first time, the British Isles are attacked. They're attacked by sea by the German Navy, shelling parts of northeastern England, Hartlepool, Scarborough, places on the east coast of England get shelled by the German Navy. That's not happened before. England gets bombed by these new inventions, airplanes and particularly Zeppelins. Big airships fly over London and they just lean over and just drop bombs on London. England can be attacked for the first time. So what does England need to do? England's an island. Get rid of Germany's air force. Get rid of Germany's navy. Job done. Right, that's why there was problems between Britain and Germany before, was because Germany wanted a big navy. Well, we get rid of that, get rid of the air force. That's all we want to do. If we can get some of those lovely colonies, that would be also very, very nice. Particularly in the Middle East, so Britain plays a bit of a double game. One of the origins of the conflict in Israel-Palestine at the moment is because in 1916, 1917, Britain promises the same area to the Jewish people in the Balfour Declaration. It says, hey, Jewish people, come and fight for Britain, and we'll let you have a little Jewish place in this area. You call it Israel. That's great. Hey, Arab people, get rid of the Turks, fight against us, fight with us against the Turks, and you can have a lovely little place over here. And then at the end of the war they go, I think it's best if we look after it. And so that's one of the origins of the conflict between the two. All right. So Lloyd George is all about that. He's all about making sure that England cannot be attacked by land and sea, and also let's have lots of these lovely colonies. But because Woodrow Wilson is there and he's American, he's our next person. He's this idealist. All right. Let's trick Wilson. So Wilson's like, hey man, you can't have colonies, that's bad, we're in the United States, everybody's got to be free. I've got this great new idea, this terrible American accent, I apologise. I've got this new idea, we'll have the League of Nations, everybody can be peace. And you go, yeah, whatever you like, whatever, Woodrow. And he's like, no, but the colonies, he said, I'll tell you what, we'll instead of giving them, no, we won't, we don't want them really, Woodrow, but look, we'll put them under League of Nations. Under the League of Nations. He's like, yeah, that's really, really good idea, that's good, yeah. And I'll tell you what, We'll look after them on behalf of the League of Nations. He's like, yeah, no, League of Nations, yeah, but we'll look after it on behalf of the League of Nations. So basically that's what happens with Britain, Japan and France, Britain and France mainly. They occupy these areas for the League of Nations to convince Woodrow Wilson. So we got Woodrow Wilson. Oh, the man's an idiot. Professor of history, big professor, thinks he knows all about the world. He's the idealist. He sees World War I as happening because there's been lots of these secret treaties. So we get rid of secret treaties and we have an open forum for dialogue where people can talk and they can solve their differences in public because everybody's watching them. And we'll call this some kind of League of Nations where everybody in the world will get together and they will talk and they will solve all the problems in the world. The other problem that's in the world is that people don't have self-determination. Self-determination means that your ethnic group should determine your country. So all English people live over here, or Czech people live there, or Polish people live there. Because this is basically Western Europe. Up until 1960s anyway. Western Europe is English people in England, Scottish people there, France is all French, Spain, Spanish, Portuguese, Italy, that's how it went. It has been that way for many, many years. It's been that way for many, many years. But we can do this and Europe's really successful. Therefore, let's do the same in Eastern Europe. We'll have national self-determination there. So Polish people can have their own land. Czechoslovaks can have their own land, even though there's no such thing as a Czechoslovak. Slavs can have their own union, and we call it Yugoslavia. So that's what he tries to do for Eastern Europe. What do you think will be the problem with this?
It's not going to work.
And why is it not going to work?
I'm not sure.
Why is he an idiot?
I'm not sure about this, but I think in Eastern Europe, just because a bunch of people spoke the same language doesn't mean they had a unified cultural identity. Partly
that, yes, true. But more so, there's no ethnic divisions in Eastern Europe that could be easily made. That's the problem. Essentially, and particularly, one ethnic group is dispersed throughout Eastern Europe. The Germans. Alright, so the Germans are expressed. Now, when they were part of Austria-Hungary, the Germans were like a big minority in Austria. They were well looked after. they now become minorities in countries like Czechoslovakia, in Poland. The problem is these borders don't exist nicely. Generally, you will have one group of people who speak one language in the cities, German, maybe Czech, and then you will have people who speak a different language in the countryside, Ukrainian, Slovak, Polish. There's no nice and easy divisions like this. So what you're actually going to do is you're going to create countries, and by the very nature of creating countries, you're going to create them with large minorities in them. These large minorities are going to feel oppressed. So you actually create another problem, particularly amongst the Germans, who are like, wait, why? And particularly in Czechoslovakia, which is a made-up country. The guy Mazarek we talked about, I think it's his uncle or something, who was pushed out the window. He goes, lobbies Wilson, let's have Czechoslovakia, and he does that by making up the Czechoslovaks. There's Czechs and there's Slovaks. There's not Czechoslovaks. Why did he have to say there's Czechoslovaks? Because the population, this is roughly right, the population of what becomes Czechoslovakia is something like 40% Czech, 30% Slovak, 20% German, 10% Hungarian. You put it like that, it really should be Czechoslovakia Germania. But if you say, well, let's take the Czechs 40% and let's take the Slovaks 30% and call them Czechoslovaks, but suddenly we have 70% Czechoslovaks and then we have 20% German. Oh, the Germans are just a small minority. They don't count. And so we set up Czechoslovakia, a made-up country. There's also another question. Where's the borders? Where do the borders lie? We don't know. And here is the thing that is the big lie of all of this that you're taught, is the war ends in 1918. There's some civil war going on in Russia, but there's all peace. No, there's not. There's a great book, I can't remember its name at the moment, is it The Deluge? That basically a recent bit of scholarship about how historiography sort of changes things. That actually Eastern Europe from 1918, 1919, 1920, even up to 1921 is fighting. Romania invades Hungary, bet you didn't know that. Poland and Germany are fighting all the time. Poland is fighting Russia all the time. Nobody knows where these borders are. So this is all because Woodrow Wilson doesn't really know what he's doing. He also has, this is based on his 14 points that he lays down and that the Germans kind of like say is really important. And these are his 14 points that he comes up in here. Alright, these are idealistic principles. An idea of peace without victors. There will be no winners in this war. Try saying that to the British and the French. What do you mean there's no victors? We've just fought 4 years, millions of our people are dead. You're going to say there's no peace without victors? Peace off. That's what we're saying to you, Wilson. Alright? Two main aims, alright? To avoid another war, that's your League of Nations, and disarmament. They want to disarm. That's going to become important later when we talk about Hitler. And self-determination. What does Clemenceau, I love Clemenceau, what does he say about Woodrow Wilson? About the 14 points?
Even Jesus Christ only needed 12 commandments?
God, 10 commandments.
Oh, God.
Alright, who does Wilson think he is? God only needed 10 commandments. Does he think he's better than God with his 14 points? Alright, so there we go. Let's wrap that up. Any questions about any of that? No? That gives us our idea of where we're at. That's the big three. Let's just talk about their we'll do their aims later on. We'll do it tomorrow. Okay? But that's where we've got. The key thing is the consequences, how the war ends. Alright? Come on, look up the Dreyfus Affair. It's very interesting. There's a great book actually. There's a guy called Robert Harris. Alright, he writes lots of counterfactual historical fiction. Counterfactual means what if history. Counterfacts, okay? And he does a lot of well-researched counterfactual history, historical fiction. And one of them is about Dreyfus Affair, which is very interesting. One is about Fatherland if Germany wins World War II. That's very interesting as well. He's done some free about the Roman Empire as well, Roman Republic under Cicero. Good, interesting author. Robert House. Good name as well. Clearly, Robert is going to be a legend. Alright guys, go on, you're going to be late.